welcome you to the Riverside Weekly. We hope your time with us today is thought-provoking, spiritually challenging, and a life-changing experience. Our discussions and messages can be raw, real, and at times very uncomfortable and even controversial. We highly encourage all of our guests and listeners to take notes, leave comments, and when possible, always share what you hear. And now here are your hosts, Pastor Selo and Pastor Mia.
Good morning. Good
morning. Welcome to Riverside.
What up?
Yay.
Riverside Weekly. What's going on?
I said Riverside. I meant Riverside Weekly. You
Riverside Weekly.
Yeah.
Welcome to Riverside Weekly. Yeah, man, we got some new dudes in there. God, you can see all of my curls. I didn't know you could see that. Those eyebrows are on fleek.
That's a Chinese-looking picture there.
Yeah.
You stereotyped?
Yeah, stereotype there.
That's an Asian-looking
There
picture.
you go.
There you go. And you look like you should be in one of the movies. Wisdom. You have wisdom. Anyway.
Oh, man. 100 episodes, man.
Yay,
We're here. We made it.
We made it 100.
100 episodes. Man, we're mailing out cars this morning and tomorrow.
Delivering. I don't know about mailing.
I can't drive to some of these places.
That's what I was going to say, but you can't deliver.
Well, we're going to deliver them through the mail.
You can't mail cars.
We're going to ship the car.
Ship. Okay.
Shipping cars.
We're getting ready to ship your car.
Shipping your car out. It sounds so much better.
Yeah.
Man, cool. So
we got a lot of things coming this year.
Yes.
Got a lot of guests that will be coming. I know we said that last
we
season.
have had some guests. We've
have,
increased.
but not as many as now. It's like we talk to people and boom, instantly they're like, that should be a podcast. That should be a podcast. You want to come join our podcast?
You want to come join our podcast? Come hang out with us.
Yeah, our podcast.
Come hang out with us.
Yeah.
So if you want to hang out with us on the podcast, then direct message us. I'm sorry, DM us.
There you go, DM.
Get at me, bro.
It's 2019. I think this season is going to bring us a lot of controversy and a lot of things that we're gonna hurt some people. We're gonna step on some toes.
Yeah.
And I think we did that a couple of times, but we backed off for a while. So we're back.
Yeah. It's because when you start getting emails and phone calls, you're just like, we must be pushing the right buttons.
Yeah.
But you said I was going to do this, and I'm doing it.
I knew you were. Messing with the microphone because you don't adjust before.
She's right. I didn't adjust. She says, you better fix that because you're going to move it. I'm like,
I knew you were going to move.
I just moved
it's okay.
that. Sorry. What was I saying? I lost my train of thought.
I don't know. Hair flip, because I'm always right.
What was I saying?
We were talking about being controversial.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, like.
We've gotten some emails. We've gotten some
feedback, and I think some of the things that we'll be tackling and discussing this next season is going to be a little bit more edgy. Not that we're trying to be edgy.
I was going to say we're hoping to be edgy. That doesn't mean we're going to be, because I like our comedic banter over the last 100 episodes. I meant minus the 1 through 8. Minus the number 1 through 8 episode. I would say I love that you make me laugh and I make you laugh, and that we can feed off of each other like this. But at the same time, I think we need to get down to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. Well, because it's there are things that we always talk about. I say we always talk. We mention it a lot of times that there are topics and subject matter that the church don't always like talking about, and I don't feel like we ever stray away from anything or we don't address anything, but I've always felt like part of what we're trying to do as a podcast is not just so much be just controversial or tackle things that the church don't want to talk to, but
address the things that people are thinking.
Yeah, thinking and dealing they're dealing with, or the what I call the life's junk, just dealing with that type of stuff. And so I don't know. We're just kind of we're just going like how the Holy Ghost leads us, just how the Spirit of God leads us in topics, and so we don't what do you call it? We don't rehearse and nothing written down, like whatever comes out. So we don't edit or.
What you hear is this.
That's it.
What
that's
you see
it.
is
Like
this?
once we start recording, that's it. Like so, it's all uncut and. Whew, okay, so what are we talking about?
Okay, now after you've done rambled on for about 15
I know, I'm
minutes.
sorry.
I'm going to say that we're going to come out with gloves on this 100th episode. Ready?
Oh.
Ping, ping.
I'm a little nervous.
We're going to talk about something that is really near and dear to me. It's actually a term that I don't like to use, and I think a lot of people have strayed away from it. But we're going to talk about where the name Christian really comes from. Because I don't like to be lumped in this group called Christian. I always say, because people always say, well, what is your church? What denomination are you? I'm like,
what do you believe?
I'm like, we love Jesus. My husband was born and raised Catholic, and I was raised in a non-denominational church, but that doesn't mean anything. We love Jesus. If you love Jesus, then you can come and join us. If you love Jesus, then you should be my friend because I love Jesus.
If you don't love Jesus, you should come anyway.
Yeah, I mean that too. But I'm just saying, I don't like the connotation or the negative stereotype that comes with the word Christian. I like to be called one of Christ's followers or Jesus lover or, that type of thing. So where does that name Christian really come from? Because I think that you have to know the full story before you can say, yeah, me too. I think that way too. Well, why do you think that way? I think that way because I know where it came from. But you tell us where it came from because, oh, wise and noble one. Let me say it this way. I'll just start off. This is an article that I found to back me up. How's that?
Okay. Well,
it said Christian in a few words is in the English language. Few words in the English language carry as much baggage as this one. See, it has a lot of baggage. It's loaded. It's a loaded label to be sure. But what's interesting is that Jesus never actually gave a name to his followers.
And it's funny that you're reading that because it's been a while now, but
I don't know, bro. I know it's 5:30, but you've got to wake up. Come on.
No. I'm processing the thought process. My thought process is because
come on, 1970s processor.
I know.
Kicking. Loading.
My biggest issue is that when I got saved, I didn't like what I saw in the church. I didn't like what I saw in Christianity.
But I think a lot of people are like that.
I agree.
Okay.
And so for me, I wanted to change what people thought about a Christian. I wanted to change what a person thought about a person who goes to church, a person who follows after Christ, a person who reads their Bible. Like I wanted to change that whole stereotype or that whole thought process. And when I realized that several years into serving God that I had become exactly what I was trying to change, if that makes any sense. So like, I didn't realize how religious I got. I didn't realize how traditional I got, how my thought process, like, this is going to sound really crazy, but I feel like I got more inducted into the way we do things than the reason why we do things. Being very churchy and that whole process. And then a few years back, I felt like the Spirit of God told me, like, you're religious, like you're religious. And I'm like, I think you got me confused with somebody else. Have you seen like the way I do youth ministry? Have you seen the way like I do like my thought process? Like, no, like you've got,
no, he didn't see all that. Mm-hmm.
You've got like, and the Spirit of God was just like, you have deep rooted like traditions, deep rooted religious thought processes and how you're doing things and how you're seeing things. And I was like, what? And so it made me realize like, wow, a lot of the reason that people don't come to church is because of the people in the church.
Yeah.
It's churchy. And so we as...
Who's we?
That's what I was going to say. We as Christians,
me and you?
as churchgoers, we as a collective society, we lump Christ, or let me rephrase that. We lump Christians and church in the same, we put them in the same boat. So if you go to church, you're automatically considered a Christian, right? And if you're a Christian, then you're automatically supposed to go to church, right? So we're putting one in the same, but like that little segment that you read there, that little excerpt, that's where I was like, well, Jesus never called us God never called us Christians. Like, it was a descriptive of who we're supposed to be like. So they were like in Antioch, when I started studying, I was like, man, it's like Christian was only mentioned like 3 times in the New Testament. Like, the 3 times out of everything that we own around Christianity, it was mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. And then what's crazy is that Paul, Jesus, Peter, Stephen, like, you go through all the disciples, none of them said, like, I'm a Christian. It was the label that everybody else outside the church gave the followers or the believers of that time, the disciples. Like, they were like, man, you're like Christ, you're a Christian, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you look at that, I feel like we as a body of believers have grasped and gravitated to the word Christian and the label of the Christian more than we have our relationship with Christ. So we feel like it's more important to be Christian than it is to be an actual believer and follower of Christ.
I don't believe that way, though.
You don't?
No, I believe. That's why I don't like that. I don't like that name. I don't like that label. You said one time before that we were boxes. Everybody puts us in boxes, right? So I don't want to be in this box, the Christian box.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't see myself that way. I see myself as living in my relationship with Christ on a daily basis.
No, that's what I'm saying is that the people see us.
First of all, who is they?
Everybody that's outside the church, everybody that's inside the church. Right. Like, when you say Christian, you automatically get thrown into that box like you're talking about. But what I'm saying is that we never as a church and as Christians, God never gave us that, but we owned it. When they started calling us Christian, like, you're more proud to be a Christian than you are actually a disciple. You grasp and hold on to more of the title and label of Christian than you do of actually having a relationship with God, having a relationship with Jesus, and living that life and following after Christ. It's easier just to be a Christian than it is to follow.
For most people, because you keep saying you. And that's offending me because it's not a you. It's not me.
Okay, not you.
Okay.
People. Okay, I'm talking to you, but I mean.
Oh, and I have somebody that does not like that to hear you people. But just saying that.
Oh, use guys.
Use guys. But I'm just saying that I don't believe that way. And probably because I'm married to you, number one. But at the same time, I really believe that label it's a horrible label. And I think it has a horrible thing behind it. I think for me, in order to explain everything you just said, explain to us where it came from.
What do you mean, the word Christian?
Yeah. Why are we lumped in this huge thing called Christians? Where did that come from?
Culture.
You're saying that Jesus didn't call us that. He never called us that.
Right.
But where did it come from? Why did somebody go
because
and slap it on us?
The people that were at the time, the people that were following after Christ, they had all of the attributes that Christ had. Yeah. So they were walking in love. They had the anointing.
Christians?
Yeah, exactly.
Christian.
Yeah.
You're a Christian.
So
it's not Christian. It's Christian.
Like a Christ. Exactly. So they had, in other words, they had all the attributes. In other words, the way that they were living, the way that they were loving one another, the way that they were loving their enemies, the way that they were being persecuted, they were dying for, everything that they were about their life resembled who Christ was. Okay. And the only way that they could describe the people that were living like Christ was say, like, man, you guys are Christians, like you're Christians, like you guys.
I like Christian better.
Living and doing the things that Christ did. When he was crucified, he was crucified, and you are doing the same things and living the same manner. And today, you don't really see that in the church. Right. You don't really see people walking in love. You don't really see people walking in forgiveness. You don't
got
really
that right, bro.
You don't really see people loving their enemies and being a living, like, you don't see, we think that we are, like, especially in the Western culture, we think that we are, but we're really not. And so we cling we cling to the title because it's easy.
Well, let me read it this way, because this one says the early church was called Christians by the powers that be for the first time in Antioch, which is what you said. It's Acts 11:26. In case you're wanting to know where it's at, it wasn't a name Jesus's disciples gave themselves. It was a name given to them by the society in Antioch, which is what you said. But why a new name for this group of Christ followers? Why, from the perspective of outsiders, weren't they simply lumped in with all the other variants of the Jewish faith? Some cultural context might help. Antioch was referred to as all the world in one city. Yeah. So kind of like a melting pot. Yeah. Where you could see all of the world's richness and diversity in one place. And the marketplace was its hub. Antioch was designed like most cities of that day, a circular wall on the outside, a marketplace in the center with an interior of the city walled in that way that divided different people groups from one another. Right. Which is kind of crazy. Anyway, let me see. I wanted to say something.
Did you just blah, blah, blah me?
I did, because you said something otherwhere. It said, it is often assumed that the name Christian was given somewhat flippantly or even derogatively by the powers that be as a sort of dismissive wave of the hand to those little Christs. Technically, the ending IAN means belonging to the party of, so Christian meant those of Jesus's party. I'm going to start calling it that. Christian. I love that. You were a Christian.
Yeah, because I mean, really, if you look at this, when you start looking and studying the scriptures and you start looking at the letters that the disciples wrote, you look at the letters that Paul wrote to the church. What I was going to say. You know, when you start looking at those letters, and the church today doesn't resemble that, you know, and so I think a lot of times people, they shy. I mean, for me, when I had that understanding, I'm like, well, man, I don't want to be known as everybody, because when you look at, I don't want to be known as, this sounds bad, and probably we're definitely gonna get some emails on this, but I'm really shy about being labeled as a Christian for that, because when you look at Christian, so like when you look at Columbus, like he was bringing Christianity to what we now know as the United States, right? So he's bringing to the northern hemisphere. Yeah, but he was killing people. That's my point.
So for that.
So like you have these people that are calling themselves Christians, right? But they literally removed Native Americans
from their land.
Took their land in the name of Christ. Like literally, like they removed an entire culture, an entire people group off the face of the earth in the name of Christ. But we as Christians refuse to accept that. You know, you go and when you look in the church history has done so much damage in the name of Christ that there's no love, there's no compassion, there's no understanding. See, to me, I feel like when you look at Paul, he went in there, he was preaching Christ, but he did not change the culture. He welcomed their culture. He was just about getting them born again, getting them saved, and they began to change on their own. He didn't come in there and force them like you need to repent, you know, or we're going to burn you at the stake. Like there was none of that. It was about loving people, loving God. And so then the culture began to change. But what we've seen in our history is that in the name of Christ, you would hang African Americans. In the name of Christ, you would kill Native Americans. And so in the name of Christ, you're doing all these things as a Christian, but we as a Christian culture, we don't like to talk about those things. And the reason we don't like talking about those things because it sheds a bad light on us. And so now we're lumped in with them. Yeah. You know, like, well, geez. I mean, because I'm probably going to get I can just feel the emails coming. Well,
you're already deviated from what we're talking about.
Oh, did I?
You're giving us
sorry.
Background. So go ahead, finish.
So when you look at, I forgot my train of thought now.
I'm sorry.
When you look at where Christians are and what we've done as a body of believers, we're not really been effective at showing the love of God, showing the love for people. It says love our neighbors as ourselves, and we're not real good at that. And so when you look at where Christians came from, where the title and everything came from, it was, like you said, is more derogatory from the standpoint of you didn't want to be called a Christian. Like you didn't want to be that. Like, and
shoo away, fly.
Yeah, and so like when you look at that in today's society, the only thing that you need to be a Christian today is have a radio station. You got
a T-shirt,
bumper sticker, and you don't even have to read your Bible. You just have to own one. Like, like you don't have to walk in love. You don't have to do any of these things, and you can consider yourself a Christian, right?
Which everybody does, yeah. And you know, it was something you said a minute ago. It said in after Acts 11:26, the word Christian is only used 2 other times in the New Testament.
But we own it like God gave it to us.
Yeah,
that's my point.
Yeah.
Is that
that's what I was trying to get you to say right there.
We own it
like God gave it to us. And God did not give us that
right.
name. You know, and again, going back to it being derogatory, it's like saying, you know, you spick or you know,
yeah, exactly.
You cracker or, you know, whatever. And that's what they were saying. You Christian.
Exactly.
You know?
Right. It was not meant
fool.
it wasn't meant to be a compliment.
Yeah.
It was meant to be a disgrace, but because you were following Christ and you were living like him and you were even willing to die the same way that he did, right? So that's when it became a badge of honor. That's when someone called you a Christian, it was an honor to be called a Christian. Where today, if someone calls you a Christian, it doesn't really mean, it doesn't carry any weight. Like, oh, okay, so you're one of those folks that go to church, like you're one of those hypocrites.
That's why I just don't like that.
Yeah, and so you get, like you said, you get lumped up into this whole group of people that you're like, wow, you know. And I think the church as a whole, I think we negate and we deny the history of things that we were involved with and the things that we've done as a church, and we haven't really owned that. And to me, I feel like the only way to own that is to really get back to what God said for us to do. Like Jesus,
that's what it
Jesus
says.
Literally, he just gave us one commandment. And I know you're in my services and you hear me say this all the time, but the one thing that I hammer all the time is that Jesus said to love one another. Like,
that
he
is
just
so
like
hard though.
He says
so hard.
Out of everything he says in the New Testament that Jesus said, he says, I give you this one command to love one another. And we get hung up on drinking, we get hung up on smoking, we get hung up on cursing, we get hung up on pornography, we get hung up on all these other things, and we define them as sin, but sin is merely being disobedient to God. So if you're not loving one another, you're in bigger sin than if you just smoke.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
so,
you cuss.
Yeah.
Or you do whatever, steal or rob.
Yeah. Like, I mean, unforgiveness is at the top of the list. Not right.
Not that any sin is labeled any different
or has any more merit. But I'm just saying, like, that's where it kind of stems from.
So here's what you were saying, and I love it because you're saying everything this article says, but it just really helps.
Did I write that?
No, you actually didn't, but I would have thought you did. It says, are we living up to our given name? Do our cities look like Antioch? And do our churches, do even our hearts look up to our given name? You know, and I wouldn't take that name. I wouldn't take that name on as a badge of honor. You know,
go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was just like, it's almost in the society that we live today, in the culture that we live in today, it's almost an embarrassment to say that you're a Christian.
Yeah, honestly.
When the people that don't believe, I mean, because we have the very thing that the world needs. Yeah. But they can't stand us because of the name. Because of the name. And we don't want them to be a part of who we are because of who we think we are.
Yeah. And it says here, do we defy the world's categories? Are we able to show the world a vision of community in which there is no social, economic, racial, or gender division, which is in Galatians 3:28 and Colossians 3:10 and 11? Or are we actually serving as instigators of division? It says, perhaps this is why you hear some Christians turning from the name, giving rise to phrases like, I am a Christ follower. Me, tribute, me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I say
not
that a lot.
A Christian, because they no longer like what it means to be a Christian from the world's perspective.
Yeah.
And that's me. That's why I've shied away from that name. And I just don't like the baggage that comes with that name. And here's what it says. Ancient Antiochians may have given us the name because of early Christians' radical inclusivity, but today it is up to us to keep that reputation alive, because the Christian label is ever redefining based on the reputation we give it. According to John 13:35, Jesus says the world gets a vote as to how they will know we are his. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And that's what you said.
Exactly. And that to me, I feel like that's where the church misses it. We can love people outside the church better than we can love people inside the church.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I see that all the time.
Yeah, and it's and I'm not saying that I'm not guilty of that. I'm just saying that you have to really, really be intentional to love one another within the church, with what's going on, And I was sharing this a couple of services back, Jesus didn't say it's how many people you get saved. He didn't say it's how many scriptures you know. He didn't say it's how often you go to church. He didn't say all these things, but these are all the things that we equate to salvation. These are all the things that we equate to being a disciple. And Jesus, like right there, he says they'll know, the world will know that you're my disciple by the way that you love one another. Not the way that you love the world, not the way that you treat the world, but the way that we treat and love one another. And I feel like that's where my drawback is when people are like, oh, so you're a Christian? I'm like, yes, from your terminology and understanding, yes, I'll say that.
Can I get a definition on that?
Yeah.
What do you think a Christian is?
Yeah, what do you think is that? And it's not that I'm anti-Jesus, I'm anti-Bible. It's not like I'm anti like Holy Ghost. Like that's not it. I'm pro God. I'm pro Jesus, and so I'm
pro Bible.
I'm so pro. I'm so pro God. I'm so pro Jesus. I'm so pro Holy Ghost. I'm so pro Father. I'm so pro Scripture that. It may look like I'm not from the church's perspective or from believer or Christian's perspective, is because I'm so pro these things that when you look at who Christ is, that's who we're supposed to mimic and be as he is. And to me, that's what I strive for, and I try to encourage people to strive for that. So if you've got to leave your denomination, your label, your box. If you have to climb out of your box in order to pursue who Christ called us to be, to me, I just feel like, is that a challenge that you're willing to accept? Yeah. Because now you're going to be persecuted by the ones in the church just as much as you are going to be persecuted by the people outside of church. Oh, you want to be a Christian now? Yeah, I don't like that. And, I love that you say that, about if you will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another, because I think you said one time, are you willing to love them enough to save them from hell? To let them go to hell.
To let them go to hell.
Do you love them well enough to let them go?
Yeah.
And that was something actually that I had to deal with our kids, when they're making questionable decisions and choices. As parents, you don't want your kids to go to hell. You like, for some of us, we don't even believe in hell, but that's neither here nor there. But for a believer, you don't want them to go to hell. So God was like, are you willing to love them enough to make the choice that they're making to go to hell? Like, they're making those decisions. Are you willing to love them enough? And I was like, no, God, I don't know if I could love them like that. He says, well, even my son, I loved my son enough so that he went to hell. And I was like, ow, like, man. So you have to love them even in spite of their decisions, in spite of their choices. Like, you have to love them past themselves. And that's when
people will know
that's
that
when
we are his
exactly
disciples.
That's when they'll know that we're his disciples. Exactly.
I believe that. And here's the last thing I have to say. And it says
preach it.
It's up to us to recover the distinction between that label, that negative connotation, versus the good part of being his disciple, to defy the world's category that they've put us in.
I heard a guy say one time, he goes, man, Christians make it so hard to be a follower of Christ.
Yeah, honestly.
Man, he's like, you go to church and you do everything that you can to be Christ-like. He says, but just the people that you go to church with, people that you work with, people, that are supposed to have Christian-owned businesses, are supposed to be Christians,
Mm-hmm.
they make it difficult for the ones that are really, really, really
Yeah.
trying to change that.
Yeah.
My dad said this. He said, you can never change anything from the outside. You can only change things from the inside. In other words, you have to be a part of that. And I think that's interesting because when we get born again, God doesn't change us on the outside. He changes us on the inside. Mm-hmm. And through that change on the inside, it begins to come outward and people begin to see that. And I think that's where we as the church, we need to begin to make those decisions and choices internally so that the world will have a different perspective of who we are.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I almost want to call this labels instead, but at the same time,
Okay, we'll call it labels.
I don't want that label, and I don't want that connotation to be evil anymore. I want to change it, and that's what I'm trying to do in my workplace. And I would encourage you to do the same, listening to this podcast, or watching for that matter. Work in your workplace to change those things, and or who you're surrounded by. Let's change the label, the negative label about it and where it came from. Let's actually show them that we are his disciples by loving one another. And my gosh, that is so, so hard. And I know you're sitting right in your cubicle and you're thinking to yourself, but do you know what they did to me?
Right.
That's an everyday thing for everyone, not just you. But do you know what we did to Christ when we forsake his name every day?
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to be out here and be a right Christian so that I can give Christian a good name, I mean, and it's hard for me
I don't want to be a Christian. I don't
want to be a Christian. No, not today, But at the same time, even though I don't like being called that, at the same time I'll go, whoa, wait a minute. What's your definition of it? Let me give you a better definition.
Yeah.
Come here and let me show you who we really are.
And I think that's where the church really messes up. We talk about who we are. We talk about what we are. We talk about what we believe. We talk about what we do. I gave this example one time where you go to a hamburger convention and they talk about hamburgers and they discuss how hamburgers are made and the type of meat and the type of bread and the type of cheese and all the vegetables. So they have this whole conversation about hamburgers, and the guy in the back, we've been here for 3 days talking about hamburgers. When are we going to cook one?
Yeah, really, honestly.
So we talk about Christianity and this whole thing, but like, when are we going to actually be one?
Yeah. Ooh, yeah, good one. So I don't know if that helped you find out where the name or the label came from, but I just think that we need to work on that label ourselves, even though we don't want to be labeled and we don't want to be in boxes.
That's just who we are. It comes with it.
Yeah. I meant, are we going to be crucified or not crucified, but persecuted for who we love and the label that we don't want to be a part of, but at the same time, we need to change.
Yep.
That's my take. Ping, ping. And we're out.
Okay, so we'll holler at you. Episode 100, man. Follow us on all our social media sites. Check out everything. Man, just where we're at. YouTube, like, subscribe, follow, tweet. I was going to say Snapchat, but we don't do Snapchat. I don't have time for Snapchat. I haven't graduated to that level yet.
It's 2019. Give it the proper
okay.
date.
We'll holler at you guys later. Y'all be peace.
It's okay. It's okay. It's early.
It's early. Holler at you guys. I'm done.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Riverside Weekly. Download the Riverside Waco app to stay connected and follow us on all social media sites at the Riverside Waco. This podcast is made possible by the givers of Riverside Community Church. Production and engineering provided by Capital G and RTV in Waco, Texas.